Welcome to the Brac Shop, and I've got another story for you today about another doll, and this is Robert the doll. Now Robert the doll started back in the early 1900s. We think about 1904. It was given to Robert Otto, who was a young child at the time. He was about 4 as well, being born in 1900. And they lived in Key West in Florida in the United States. It was a big house that they used to live in. There's been so many different stories written about Robert the doll and how he originated. In fact, there's almost 2 branches of that story. And if you look around, you'll find different versions of that story. But there's 2 main stories. One, that it was given to Robert by a Bahamian servant of theirs, apparently was dismissed. And if you read along some different websites and books, that Robert Otto's father actually had an affair with the servant, and which is probably why she was dismissed. Well, the story goes is that the doll was given to Robert Otto. Now, he was actually known as Robert Jean Otto, and he used to be known as Jean. And so he used to call the doll Robert, differentiating the 2 of them. And so we think Robert the doll was given to Jean from a Bahamian servant that they had, and was later dismissed. And she gave the doll to Robert, who actually, they say, put a curse on the doll, a voodoo curse. Another train of thought, another story, is that the doll was given to Jean from his grandmother. And different stories say it was his grandfather who actually went, or maybe both of them, because they both went to Germany and got the doll, made by the Steph Company. And I hope I pronounced that correctly. So they brought Robert back from Germany for Jean. And Jean loved the doll. In fact, like all children, he was speaking to the doll and talking back from the doll, until things became to be a bit strange, because sometimes people would hear the doll speaking back, not in Jean's voice, but in a different voice. Jean having a higher child voice, and Robert having a deeper, more sinister tone to the voice. And people just weren't sure what was actually happening. And that's when things started to get a bit weird. Things would happen, like one night they went racing up into Jean's bedroom because they heard this fighting going on and things being thrown around, only to go into the room to find the whole room a mess and finding Jean hiding under the bed. And when questioned, Jean could only say that Robert did it. Robert had done it. And that became a slogan for the doll. When things went wrong, Robert did it. So was it a child's play? They kept blaming the doll? Or was Robert really doing all the mischievous pranks? And things got so bad that the great aunt actually suggested that Robert be put in a box and placed up in the attic. And so they decided to do that. And the next day, the great aunt had a stroke and actually died. So how do you explain that? Now, as time went by and Jean grew up, Jean would take Robert everywhere with him. He would take him on outings and have him at the dinner table and feed him, and just have him around like a real person. And Robert was not just a tiny doll, he was a huge, big doll as well. And he'd be dressed in a sailor's outfit, just like Jean would have had when he was younger. So Jean grew up and he went to university and he ended up in Paris studying art, and he became an artist. And that's where he met his future wife, Annette Parker, and they got married in 1930. They moved back to New York, where she became a concert pianist and he became an artist. And then they decided to move back to Key West, to the family home. So she left concert playing, and he went back into domestic life. And Jean became an artist, and they used to have a top turret in their house, and that's where he'd do his paintings. And coming back home, that's where he rekindled his friendship with Robert. And he had Robert with him everywhere. He had a new sailor suit made out for him, and always had Robert beside him everywhere they went. Even had him at the dinner table, making sure he had food to eat. And Jean would be painting in the turret, the top part of the building, and he would always have Jean there. And people would say they could actually see Robert moving around from window to window in the top turret. Interesting. They would have dinner parties, and dinner guests could hear noises coming from upstairs where Robert would be placed for the evening, like little fightings going on and walkings up and down the room, all very strange for their dinner guests. And of course it all started to take its toll on Anna and Jean's marriage. But they stayed together until 1974, when Jean actually succumbed to Parkinson's disease and passed away. So when Jean passed away, most of the belongings was left to Jean's sister. So Annette didn't really have much left, so she had to sell the house. So Annette sold the house to her friend William Geyser, who in turn sold it to William and Myrtle Reuter back in 1974. There's been quite a few different tenants that actually rented out the house. And in the end, there was 2 men that actually moved in, and they could hear noises coming from the above rooms where Robert was supposedly supposed to be. They could hear strange noises and strange events. And some of the stories, like the plumber who came and saw Robert in one place, and when he finished his work, turned around and saw Robert in a different place. Very strange things happening, and strange stories like that. And other stories of Robert actually locking people in certain rooms as well. Now Myrtle Reuter, she actually grew fond of Robert and actually lived with Robert for 6 years. She didn't really mind so much of everything that was happening. But she moved away. She took Robert with him as well. And then in 1994, she took Robert to the Fort East Martello Museum. And that's in Florida as well. And she left him with the museum. She said she had had enough of his wanderings around, and she even said that he locked her in a room as well at one stage, and probably in retaliation of her locking him away because he was walking around too often. So she left him there, and apparently a few months later Myrtle Reuter actually passed away. Were they connected? I'm not sure, but you never know. Maybe she knew she didn't have long left and wanted him to go to a good home. And at the Fort East Martello Museum, they even had some strange incidents happening, like strange noises. And at first, when Robert arrived at the museum, he was put in the back room with a cloth over him to be on display later on. And the curators would always not want to be on duty when they had to show him to people. I don't know why. It must have been the energy that they could pick up from Robert. But there have been so many different stories with him there, like him apparently one night flying through the corridors. And apparently one of the curators, who was very cynical and anti-superstitious, actually something happened to her because she actually went flying out of the museum, never to return again. So what is it with Robert? In fact, they actually had to put him in a plexiglass showcase, because there's rules to visit Robert. And again, it's all for respect. And for Robert, if you should have the chance to actually go and visit him, if you dare, there are rules that you have to follow as well. Like you have to say hello to him when you go into the room. And if you're going to take pictures of him, to ask his permission if you can take pictures. And when you leave, to say goodbye and thank you. Because apparently there's been hundreds of letters sent in of people begging forgiveness because they didn't believe in Robert and they took his picture without asking, and the strange things have happened for taking his pictures. Ill fortune has come to a lot of people. So to have respect. And again, it boils down to respect for everything, for your fellow human beings, to toys, to items, to spirits. That's the basic rule. Have respect. So do that if you should ever go and visit. In fact, there's a few rules if you do. There's the rules that say that you should say hello to him when you go in. And if you're taking pictures or if you want to film him, to ask his permission. And then afterwards to say thank you and goodbye to him. In fact, just be wary of looking at his picture. Just have a little thank you for letting us see his picture, which I have as well, just to be on the safe side and to be respectful. And there's been some strange happenings with taking pictures of Roberts. Like people's cameras won't work, or they'll find all their pictures don't turn out, except for the pictures of Robert, or vice versa. All their pictures turn out and no pictures of Robert. Very strange things happen there. And it's actually quite common in all these supernatural places. Strange things happen with people's cameras. Programs like filming the paranormal have gone and taken pictures of Robert. And even so, strange things have happened with their cameras as well. So always be careful and request permission if you're going to take pictures of Robert. And it might be a good example for anything you're taking pictures of as well. Now the museum, the Fort East Martello Museum, is open and you can go and visit Robert. And also Jean's house, the artist's house as it's nicknamed, is open as well. In fact, it's a B&B, a bed and breakfast, and you can actually stay there. It's at 534 Eaton Street in Key West. Now, I'm not associated with any of these places yet. So that was Robert the doll. So what do you think? And you can go and visit him as well if you want. There's a lot of things in this world which we still can't explain, which fall into the paranormal. And I'm sure one day science will have an explanation for it. So, what do you think? If you've liked this, why don't you subscribe and click on the bell below if you haven't done so already. And tell your friends and share the video as well. So thanks for stopping by, and hopefully I'll see you soon at the Brac Shop.